All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify a concept that honestly gets buried way too often in heavy corporate jargon. When you hear things like project management, Gantt charts, or Agile, you probably immediately picture some stress-filled boardroom, right? Or maybe a massive IT rollout happening in some corporate skyscraper. But here's the reality. The fundamental mechanics of managing a project are just everyday skills. They apply to almost everything we do. So we're going to strip away all that complex terminology and just get back to absolute basics. Specifically, the core constraints that dictate whether an initiative wildly succeeds or just completely falls flat. By the time we wrap this up, I promise you'll start looking at your daily tasks in a completely new light.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by seeing how projects are literally everywhere. Then, we'll clearly define what a project actually is. Look at the classic triple constraints. Expand that to the 6 constraints we use today, and wrap up with the concept of the juggling magician.
So, part 1. Projects are everywhere. Let's picture a farmer out in an agricultural field. Every single season, they pull off a massive, highly complex project, and they do it without ever touching a corporate buzzword or sitting through a single boring status meeting. Think about it. They have to prep the soil, logically sequence planting the seeds based on, constantly shifting weather patterns. They have to rigorously manage irrigation, and they're aiming for a successful harvest within a really specific, unforgiving seasonal window. That entire process? That is pure project management in action. Once you actually start looking for the core mechanics of project management, you realize it is omnipresent. It's in every facet of our lives.
Moving on to part 2, let's actually define a project.
What exactly is a project anyway? I mean, if a farmer's doing it and a high-tech IT manager is doing it, what's the common thread? Well, it's absolutely crucial to separate a true project from just ongoing, unmanaged, everyday work. In business, we usually call that everyday stuff operations. Operations are the routine, repetitive things you do, like paying your monthly utility bills, answering standard customer service emails, doing the weekly grocery run. But a project, that's entirely different. Think about completely renovating your kitchen. It's unique, it's highly temporary, and it demands a totally different level of focus and oversight. So how do we actually know when we've crossed that line into project territory?
According to our source material, a project comes down to a very specific, strict set of parameters. First off, it's temporary. It has a definitive start date and a definitive end date. The clock is always ticking, and from that start date to that end date, you have a singular, incredibly clear goal to achieve. But here is the real catch. You are severely constrained. The universe has not handed you unlimited time, and you definitely don't have an endless bank account. You've got to cross that finish line using highly limited resources. This distinction matters so much because, honestly, if you have an initiative without a firm end date or a strictly constrained budget, you don't have a project, you have a hobby, or worse, you've just got a black hole for resources. A true project is never open-ended. It always has a final destination.
Which brings us to part 3, the triple constraints.
Historically, traditional project management pros looked at a project's success through a really narrow lens. For decades, the whole industry focused almost entirely on just 3 fundamental constraints. And, this made perfect sense back in the early industrial era. Back then, the primary goal was just getting a physical building constructed, or pushing a basic product out the factory door without bankrupting the company in the process.
Those 3 historical pillars, they are scope, cost, and schedule. Think of scope as your highly ambitious wish list. You ask a client or a stakeholder, or even your family what they want out of a project, and they excitedly list off all these grand desires and features. That's the scope. But then reality hits with cost. You have to step in and say, okay, great, but we have a strict financial cap. I've only got, say, $10,000 to make those grand desires happen. And finally, schedule. You can't just tinker away in the garage for 5 years. Time is always running out. Traditional project management was basically defined by this ongoing, fierce battle between these 3 forces. If the scope increases, like the client suddenly wants 5 more features, friction happens. The cost inevitably goes up, and the schedule stretches out. You pull one edge of this triangle, and the other 2 are going to heavily strain.
Now let's look at part 4, expanding to 6 constraints. Because in the modern world, just delivering something on time and within budget, it simply isn't enough anymore. Imagine 2 totally different scenarios. In the first one, a chef cooks a meal and gets it to your restaurant table exactly on time and perfectly on budget. In the second scenario, a different chef cooks the exact same dish, also perfectly on time and on budget. Mathematically, the cost and schedule are identical. So what's different? The quality. Quality is the absolute perfection with which that original scope is delivered. If that perfectly timed, perfectly budgeted food tastes absolutely terrible, it really doesn't matter that the technical requirements were met, right? The project failed. Your customer is incredibly frustrated and angry. This shows exactly why those initial 3 constraints are dangerously insufficient on their own. Quality has to be fiercely protected as a primary focus.
Alongside quality, we have to introduce 2 more vital pieces to our modern puzzle: risk and resources. Risk is all about proactive forecasting. It's asking, what could possibly go wrong here, and am I actually prepared for it? Real-world risks are everywhere. What if your main supplier suddenly goes bankrupt? What if a massive winter storm shuts down your construction site for a whole week? You have to plan for that stuff. And then we have resources. Now, a lot of people confuse resources with just financial cost, but while money is a resource, it can't buy absolutely everything. Resources specifically refer to your non-monetary limitations. Maybe you only have one expert engineer on staff who actually knows how to write the specific code you need. Or maybe you're stuck waiting on a highly specific government permit before you can even break ground. Your people, your infrastructure, your equipment, these are all strictly limited resources that demand heavy management.
So our constraint count officially jumps from the classic 3 up to a much more realistic, much more complex 6.
Scope, cost, schedule, quality, risk, and resources. This is the absolute core of what determines whether an initiative lives or dies. Truly understanding this 6-point framework is exactly what separates a chaotic, stressful failure from a resounding, predictable success. These 6 elements, they form this tightly woven, fiercely interdependent web. You can never just isolate them. If a client suddenly demands more scope, more features, more deliverables, you can't just nod and say yes without adjusting the rest of the web. Adding scope means your cost is going to increase. Your schedule will undoubtedly stretch. Stretching that schedule might increase your risk of hitting a bad market shift or weird weather. And if you try to rush and prevent that schedule stretch without adding more budget, you will almost certainly tank your quality or severely overwork your limited resources. A truly successful project manager knows they can't just hyper-focus on 1 or 2 of these. It is absolutely critical to balance all 6 constraints simultaneously from the start date right to the finish line. Pull one thread, the whole web moves. Mastering that web, that is the secret to project success.
And that leads us to our final section, the juggling magician.
Our source material uses this truly spectacular metaphor to describe how all of this comes together in practice. It describes a successful project manager as a magician who is trying to connect all the 6 constraints. Not only just connect, beautifully juggling all the 6 constraints, and right from start to end, he's moving seamlessly without stress and delivering the end result with perfection. I mean, what an incredible image, right? When you picture a project manager from now on, don't just picture someone in a gray suit checking off boxes on a clipboard. Picture this masterful, hyper-focused performer flawlessly keeping scope, cost, schedule, quality, risk, and resources suspended in the air all at once. And the truly amazing part is that this magic isn't an illusion. It is the very real result of mastering those invisible, interconnected forces.
But how is this magic trick actually performed out in the real world without all those objects just crashing to the ground? It's done through methodology. Project management is a highly structured, rigid framework. Think of it as the intense, behind-the-scenes training the magician goes through so they never drop the balls when the pressure is on. This methodology gives you the specific tools to systematically navigate unpredictable risks, stubbornly maintain high quality even when your resources are severely limited, and ultimately deliver that perfect end result. You just can't rely on natural intuition or try to wing it. Someone who deeply understands and strategically uses this framework is going to deliver a massive software rollout or even just a simple home renovation far better than someone who doesn't.
So, knowing that a project is completely defined by clear goals, a strict start and end date, and these 6 highly dynamic constraints, I want you to ask yourself, are you just managing your projects, or are you beautifully, magically leading them? The next time you set out to accomplish a goal, whether you're managing a corporate merger or meticulously planting crops out in an agricultural field, remember the 6 constraints. Remember that interdependent web. Master the juggle, and you master